The FBI is on a manhunt for the shooter who killed conservative activist Charlie Kirk on Wednesday. The assassination during one of his political events at a university drew criticism from conservatives and liberals, but also sharpened the tension between the two sides. CGTN's Jim Spellman is following the story and has details. Jim?
Yeah, on a fast-moving investigation happening here, and the FBI has released these images of the suspected gunman taken from video surveillance. They say this alleged gunman appears to be a college-age male, and investigators believe he shot Kirk from the roof of a building about 130 meters away. Listen.
We have recovered what we believe is the weapon that was used in yesterday's shooting. It is a high-powered bolt-action rifle. That rifle was recovered in a wooded area where the shooter had fled. The FBI laboratory will be analyzing this weapon. Investigators have also collected footwear impression, a palm print, and forearm imprints for analysis.
There's a $100,000 reward for information leading to the shooter. Charlie Kirk was an influential voice in the conservative movement and ardent supporter of President Trump. When he was just 18 years old, he founded Turning Point USA, an organization that focused on getting young people to support conservative candidates and causes. He was known for holding debates and taking questions from liberals who opposed his point of view, and this is exactly what he was doing on the campus of Utah Valley University when he was shot and killed. Anand?
Jim, what's been the reaction from Republicans and Democrats here in the United States?
Well, without doubt, there have certainly been some conservatives who are flat out blaming liberals and Democrats for what happened. There's also been widespread condemnation of the shooting from across the political spectrum. We heard from former President Barack Obama and other prominent Democrats condemning these actions. President Trump immediately ordered flags flown at half-staff and says he will posthumously award Charlie Kirk the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Kirk's murder comes amid a wave of political violence in the United States. President Trump himself faced 2 assassination attempts as a candidate last year. The official residence of the Democratic governor of Pennsylvania was firebombed in April, and 2 state lawmakers in Minnesota were shot in August. One of those lawmakers and her husband died. And Wednesday's shooting, also part of a much larger wave of gun violence in the United States. At about the same time Kirk was shot in Utah, a school shooting was unfolding in nearby Colorado. Anand?
Thanks, Jim. That's CGTN's Jim Spellman with that update. To discuss the political violence in the United States, we welcome Rina Shah. She is a political commentator and CEO of Rilax Strategies. She joins us right here in Washington, D.C. Also here in D.C., Imani Chairs is a professor of digital storytelling at George Washington University. Stephen Kent is a political writer. He joins us from Virginia. And from Maryland, Joseph Williams is a former senior editor at U.S. News and World Report. Thanks to all of you for being with us. Rina, let me start with you. I think it's fair to say that Charlie Kirk was a controversial figure, but he did have a very big following, especially among young people. He made statements that some may consider racist, some may consider his statements inflammatory, but did not encourage any kind of violence, nor did he engage in violence himself, which led actually to one opinion writer in the New York Times today to say that he did politics the right way. What do you make of his killing, and why do you think he was targeted?
He was targeted simply because of what he believed in. And I think that is so anti-American on its face. What we have here enshrined in our First Amendment is really that free speech that we all really truly love above all else. It's what allows us to sort of walk about freely, express our opinions without fear of retribution, whether it be from a government and certainly not from our fellow citizens, because when rights are enjoyed by all, there should be this sense that there's a safety there. Now, Charlie, over the years, I've known him a decade exactly. We've been interacting here and there for about a decade. Charlie grew the following organically because he went into places to have uncomfortable conversations, to go against the grain, if you will. He was a contrarian in many ways, but in recent years, I really watched him lead with his faith, frequently quoting biblical verses and really putting that front and center. Dividing people, I don't believe was Charlie's goal. I believe his goal was actually to be more inclusive, to get people to understand that the founders of this nation wanted us to continually strive for a more perfect union by having conversations that included diverse opinions, different opinions. And I think at the end of the day, say what you will about Charlie's style, maybe his approach, even some of the views he held, which I disagreed with. He had every right to say them. He was a private citizen and he did not deserve to have his life snuffed out like this. In the past few hours, I've heard people saying, you reap what you sow. Well, everything I've ever heard Charlie say was just a personal opinion. And that is what any of us Americans are guaranteed the right to do within these United States.
Joseph Williams, Charlie Kirk was killed with a single bullet, as far as we know, and it was something that was caught on video because there were so many people at this event using their telephones to videotape what was going on there. The killer, we understand, fired from about 130 meters away, that's about 200 yards away, before this crowd, a big crowd, at a political event. What kind of atmosphere does that create? What kind of message does it send?
Unfortunately, it doesn't send anything good. Keep in mind that when Charlie Kirk was killed at this event, it was very much around the same time that we heard Donald Trump talking about immigrants, that we have people sending troops into Chicago, masked armed people on the streets, Washington, D.C., occupied, according to some people. It's hard to talk about his death in isolation, his murder in isolation, because we already have a superheated rhetoric around our politics right now. And it's easy to disagree with Charlie Kirk. There's a lot of things that I think that he talked about that I was absolutely not in favor of. I do not think he should have been killed. I don't think anyone deserves to die for their opinion. However, we do have a chief executive who is responsible for a lot of this, going back to his first ride down the golden escalator talking about we're being invaded. I mean, that kind of language was beyond the pale back then in 2016. Now it's become a part of discourse, but with that discourse, we're creating an atmosphere where it's easy to translate harsh words into bullets and into action. So I think that it's not going to take us anyplace good. I think a lot of people on the right and the left are visibly upset about what has happened. The question is, are there enough of those people who are upset and who don't believe that what happened should have been, is at all justified or should be the subject of retribution? Are there enough people out there who don't believe that to keep things at a reasonable temperature? It's an open question, in my opinion, as whether or not there are.
Stephen Ken, great to have you with us. Welcome to the show. Stephen, Charlie Kirk was a young conservative with what some may say were very extreme views. He did play a key role in pulling together that coalition that put Donald Trump in the White House for a second time. For our international audience, can you give us a sense of who he was and the role he played in right-wing politics? And, you know, what do you attribute to his appeal among young people?
Well, I think you can answer both those questions with the same thing, which is that he made conservatism unapologetic and fun. I came up in college campuses in the 2010s, was doing college campus activism and conservative outreach around 2015 to 2017 when Turning Point USA was really taking off. And I'll tell you firsthand, college Republican meetings were empty. If you were a college Republican, you didn't go to the elephant meetings. You went to Turning Point USA meetings. I don't know if it was the beer, the pizza, the good times, but it was pugnacious, forward conversation, actually in the style of Bill Buckley as a good old-fashioned conservative. It was about fighting. It was about moving on from, we always have to be compassionate conservatives of the Bush era and look into the heart of people who are on the other side than us. And that's important. Empathy and politics in America have to go together. It's inseparable if we want to have a country, but it often comes at the expense of speaking truth and actually saying what you mean. And Charlie Kirk was able to do that and rally young people across this country to his cause. And the columnist of the New York Times that was mentioned earlier by you was Ezra Klein, writing for the opinion page there, and saying that liberals should be quite jealous of what he built. And they thought that they had the youth in America captured. Turns out they didn't. They just weren't being presented another option of clear-eyed conservatism that says very simple things like biological sex is a thing that exists, men shouldn't play in women's sports, and the likes. He has very non-controversial opinions by and large with the majority of the public. And I really reject what your previous panelist just said about laying this at the feet of Donald Trump of all people. This is a moment in which politics is getting heated because it's getting quite competitive. And I think that that's very important to point out, that the Republican Party is in ascendance and surging because they are actually stepping forward into the fray. And our opponents don't like that.
Okay. Let me get a brief response on that from Joseph.
That's a lot to take in, and I think it's wrong on several points. I mean, again, look back at Donald Trump's speeches. Look at 2024 when candidate
Yes,
Donald
they're
Trump
very
was
divisive.
talking about
Divisive
radical left.
politics
Hang
is
on,
actually
radical
needed.
left lunatics talking about how if people had to be rough with suspects, so be it. If his opponents got control, that they would be enemies of the state. We also were looking at January 6, 2020, where he led an insurrection but was never held to account. I think it's ludicrous to say anything other than this heated rhetoric. Donald Trump may not have started it, but he certainly did nothing to quiet it. And I think he only did more to make it even more of a heated atmosphere than it already was.
Okay, I want to get to Imani. Cheers. Imani, good to see you. Charlie Kirk made some controversial statements. I think we can agree on that. I mean, including calling Martin Luther King awful and expressing the view that the passage of the Civil Rights Act was a mistake. He also said Palestinians don't exist and that there's no starvation in Gaza. So, you know, these are statements which many people will find very, very troubling, find them hurtful as well. I mean, how symptomatic was his death of the deep divisions in the country today?
Oh, well, I mean, first and foremost, you know, prayers to his now widow and his children. He has two young children. And I think what should not be lost in this larger conversation is that America has a gun violence problem. And we can go back to Abraham Lincoln. We can talk about Martin Luther King Jr., we can talk about Robert Kennedy, we can talk about his brother, John Kennedy, all individuals assassinated with a gun because they were speaking their opinions. They were sharing their vision for America. And this is exactly who America is. We unfortunately are a country where gun violence is the norm. It's part of our DNA. And so whether we have sympathies or empathies, I know Mr. Kirk wasn't really a fan of empathy as it relates to gun violence, but I am. And my condolences to his wife, to his children, to the people who loved him. And we need to also talk about gun violence. And it is not lost on me or probably anyone else that in the moment of his assassination, he was speaking about mass shootings. It's incredibly unfortunate, and it's a sad day.
Rina, as Imani says, the United States has a history of political violence. I mean, we take it from Lincoln to Kennedy to Martin Luther King. We had the attempt on Reagan's life, 2 attempts on President Trump's life, and the killing of a Minnesota lawmaker. I mean, we talk about Charlie Kirk. He engaged with his opponents. He listened to them. He was able to accept opposing viewpoints. But why do you think people feel the need to resort to this kind of violence against people with whom they don't agree?
I believe it's because they've been radicalized. And look, I've come up in the era, my adult life has been spent in the post 9/11 era. And I remember the many thousands of Americans we lost today in multiple sites because of the horrific acts of 9/11, 2001. Forever changed the lives of many of us. Some of us were connected to victims, and we started to see the world in a different way. We started to see a foreign enemy was after us. And there's been a lot of talk of radical Islam and radicalization by people who practice Islam of the Muslim faith. And I think one thing that I see happening now amongst my fellow Americans from coast to coast is that they've been radicalized by various people, entities that get them believing that it is okay to pick up arms, and to snuff out the life of somebody who you just disagree with ideologically.
Yeah.
You may have a different view with. We saw it with former Congressman Gabby Giffords having a constituent services table in front of a grocery store, getting shot in the head. Her life forever changed. Somebody I knew, former state lawmaker Melissa Wortman, and her husband assassinated in cold blood in their home in Minnesota, simply for being a sitting lawmaker and perhaps for a tough vote she had recently taken. This is part and parcel with American life, and we can talk about how very easy it is for mentally ill people to access guns in this country. We don't have the type of curbs on guns that I believe we ought to. I believe we need a full-on ban on assault weapons, for example. But then you've got people who genuinely thump the Constitution and say, if we limit gun rights for one group, then we open the door to limiting them for other groups.
Yeah.
And I've spoken to Black Americans about this who are conservative, who've given me that exact line. But back to the radicalization of our fellow Americans, it's happening online, it's happening offline. And I think it's because we no longer have a very civil society that believes in the norms of respecting neighbors, of connecting with individuals at places of worship. We know religion and attendance at religious services is in decline. So younger Americans need to be part of the solution, or at least of striving to one on this, because it is a multi-pronged problem, and we're going to need a multifaceted approach to solve it.
Okay. Stephen, you wanted to say something a moment ago. Go ahead.
Well, there's a lot of discussion going back and forth about gun violence, and I'm not going to shy away from that being an issue that scares me in everyday life as a father of a teenage daughter who goes to the mall, who goes to school. These things are an actual point of concern, but this country goes through fits and waves of violence and then times of relative peace. And when there's discussion about gun violence as a relation to this, and then there's discussion about assault weapons, when we're talking about a Mauser bolt-action rifle used for standard hunting purposes, which, you know, we're always told that, well, that's the kind of gun that is off limits for these kinds of discussions, and that's part of Second Amendment rights. Well, guns of any type can be used to kill people and do incredible harm. But we are in a moment right now, really the past decade, with a little bit of wiggle room, where political violence, assassinations, and politically charged violence is rising that we haven't seen since the 1960s and 70s. And as someone born in 1989, I'm curious if anyone older than me on this panel can speak to what changed and what cooled those politically rising tensions in that time period. Because, you know, again, we went through a period of massive wave assassinations, political bombings, and the likes, and then it just stopped. And I'd kind of like to know, how can we actually turn back towards that?
Right. Okay. Imani, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I would say, as someone born in 1980, so just like a little bit before you, that it didn't stop. And I think in certain communities you're impacted differently. But I believe, unfortunately, there is a gun violence issue that is inherent in the United States. We are the only country in the world that faces, you know, not only political assassinations, but then our school shootings. And I have an 11-year-old, so I too, you know, like the gentleman said, you know, I'm consciously worried about my son and where he goes, and as he's you know, growing into those preteen years, and what does independence look like for him? It is terrifying. It is terrifying that we cannot come together as a nation around Second Amendment discussions that don't completely turn people off. And I feel like this is, until we can truly address gun violence in this country, that we're not going to be able to stop this madness that we're seeing. Schools, political rallies, Gabby Gifford, assassinations of lawmakers in their homes, attempted assassination on presidential candidates. Just it must stop, but I don't think it ever stopped, and I don't believe there was ever a lull. I just think, depending on where you were in this country and the communities you were in, it might not have raged as high on the list.
Okay. Joseph Williams, if we look at the numbers, there's been quite an alarming surge in political violence here in the United States. The Democrat Senator Dick Durbin has talked about that. Let's listen to what he had to say.
In 20 years leading up to 2015, we had 2 incidents of political violence against elected officials. In the 10 years since, we've had 25. The numbers tell the story. It is much more dangerous than it used to be.
So, Joseph, U.S. Capitol Police say there were nearly 9,500 threats against members of Congress, their staff, and family members. I mean, what is your view on why the United States is seeing this level of political violence and threats that we hear about?
Well, as somebody who was born in the 60s and the gray-haired elder statesman of the panel, I would suppose, there are 2 factors that I think that are really to blame here. I mean, the first is the advent of social media, where there is no discourse except the loudest voice wins, the harshest insult wins, and there's really a winner-take-all as far as political discourse is concerned. The second is it became okay to demonize an opponent. Now, I'm not saying that the right has a monopoly on this. They certainly don't. However, if you look at the scales, the balance tips towards that direction. And again, 10 years ago, who came on the political scene? Who came down an escalator talking about demons and criminals and people who can't be trusted and a full-scale invasion? The third factor is lax gun laws, the loosening of gun laws. The assault weapons ban expired, was not renewed. It was passed under George W. Bush, rather, and not renewed. It was allowed to sunset. Free for all for guns. Marketing ramped up for guns. The gun companies making millions and trillions of dollars over that time period. School shootings on the rise. People taking assault weapons into malls. Weapons of war being allowed to foment in gun shops and on American streets, and a sort of rhetoric from the NRA suggesting that if you wanted to be a real man, you had to own one of these weapons. And even real masculinity didn't even stop them, because they started issuing AK-47, or rather AR-15s in pink colors, allowed them to be customized. Right. Gun fetishization rose online. You go online right now, you'll find any manner of videos that tell you how to create a bump stock. They'll tell you how to create a rapid fire weapon. That'll tell you how to create an automatic weapon out of a semi-automatic weapon, and how to print a 3D weapon from your home. So we have a lot of factors at play here. Right. Not all of these genies can be put back in the bottle. So I think that we're in for a rough ride. It's going to take a long time, and I'm not sure exactly how it ends. I wish I knew. Yeah.
Rina, there was a poll done by the Wall Street Journal. It was done in July, which showed that more than 80% of Democrats and 80% of Republicans hold not just an unfavorable view of the other party, but a very unfavorable view. In 2010, those numbers were 50% for Republicans and 40% for Democrats. So what's led to these deep divisions? I mean, what's driving the division?
As a longtime political operative who has spent much of my past decade and a half in the field, I would say it's the way the parties operate. People in general do not trust the parties increasingly. They feel that the parties are not just rigging systems, they are feeling like the parties are kind of keeping the status quo. And people want change. People are hungry for change in the modern era. You see a great many systemic reforms rejected by sitting lawmakers because guess what? The regulators don't want to regulate themselves. So that is what's led to a lot of the frustration you see. People don't find themselves represented by the very people elected to represent them. And that level of mistrust, the eroding trust in our institutions certainly contributes to it. But people find politicians by and large these days to be corrupt. And look at this. We have no ban on insider trading, or one with teeth at least, within U.S. Congress. And we find that as each year goes by, districts across the country get increasingly gerrymandered. We have the influence of big money in politics to the point where the little man can't even enter the arena if he or she ever wants to run. So I would say this, the parties are part of the problem. We love to say that we're a multi-party system here, but we genuinely are a duopoly. And breaking this duopoly is a very, very tall order given what we're up against. Younger Americans no longer want to engage in the process. And what I find most disturbing, what I do think will be a subsequent sort of a casualty of the fatal shooting of Charlie Kirk, is that people will be increasingly and maybe ever more scared of raising
Rina,
their voices publicly.
Yeah, Rina, I want to get.
I mean, you've got a whole crop of Americans now making money in the gig economy by producing lifestyle content. Political creators increasing in number on both sides of the aisle. Are these people?
Okay, Rina, I've just got a minute left. Sorry to interrupt you. I've just got a minute left. I want to get to Stephen. Stephen, there were also some other numbers by the Chicago Project on Security and Threats in 2022, showing that 40% of Democrats supported the use of force to remove Mr. Trump from the presidency. 25% of Republicans supported the use of the military to stop protests against Mr. Trump's agenda. What does that tell us? I mean, have people lost faith in U.S. institutions?
Well, of course they have. I mean, I'm going to keep this on campus issues and free speech safety. There's a reason that people like Michael Knowles from the Daily Wire, Ben Shapiro, Charlie Kirk have been encouraged by their security teams to wear bulletproof vests when they go onto campus. There's a reason that when Ben Shapiro, for example, tries to go to Berkeley, often they try to deny access to the property, not because of what he's going to say, but because it's too expensive to provide the security necessary to keep these people safe. And I want people to ask themselves, safe from whom and why? Why is there a climate on campuses where ideas are so threatening to people that anyone, whether you're some boring old academic like Charles Murray or some young hotshot like Charlie Kirk, that you feel threatened by that? Most of this panel discussion has been a pretty disgusting deflection from the actual issue of political violence that took Charlie Kirk's life and people's ability to speak freely. If you are a young conservative in this country, you are quite familiar from the earliest ages of being called fascist and Nazi, whether you like someone like Mitt Romney or whether you're some wingnut who's into someone like Nick Fuentes. People don't distinguish between Charlie Kirk and me when I'm on a college campus. That is the issue. Left-wing radicalism is an actual problem, and yet we're just talking about gun violence as if nothing happened.
Okay, I'm afraid I'm going to have to interrupt you there. We've run out of time. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington.